The altimeter reads 50 feet. Lieutenant James Walker can see individual whitecaps through the spray-streaked plexiglass of his cockpit. The B-24 Liberator shudders violently at this altitude. Every ripple in the Atlantic becomes turbulence that wants to kill you. His hands grip the control yoke so tightly that his knuckles have gone white beneath his leather gloves. Through the murk ahead, perhaps 800 yards distant, a dark shape cuts through the grey water. The conning tower of a German U-boat, moving south at 12 knots, her diesel engines rumbling as she charges batteries in what her commander believes is safety. It is the 19th of July, 1943. In 3 weeks, Walker and pilots like him will sink 40 German submarines. 40 operational U-boats were destroyed in 21 days. But the weapon that accomplishes this seemingly impossible feat is not a new bomb, not a faster aircraft, not even better intelligence. It is a tactical decision that looks indistinguishable from suicide. Flying so low over the Atlantic that a single moment of inattention, one gust of wind, one distracted glance at the instrument panel, means instant death. The irony will obsess military analysts for decades afterward. By the spring of 1943, the Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic so catastrophically that Britain faced genuine starvation within months. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than American shipyards could replace them. And the solution, the tactical innovation that would reverse the entire strategic balance of the Atlantic War, required pilots to fly at precisely the altitude where they could not afford to make even one mistake. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is not a story about technology, though technology played its role. This is a story about the psychological price of tactical desperation. It is about men who chose to fly at 50 feet, an altitude where the ocean filled their entire field of vision, where there was no horizon, no sky, only grey water rushing beneath them at 180 miles per hour. It is about the decision to trade safety for effectiveness, to accept paralyzing fear as the constant companion of every patrol, because the alternative was losing the war entirely. The numbers in March of 1943 told a story of impending catastrophe. German U-boats sank 627,000 tons of Allied shipping that month, 108 ships sent to the bottom in 31 days. Merchant sailors were dying faster than training programs could replace them. For every U-boat the Allies managed to sink, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was sending 3 more into the Atlantic hunting grounds. The mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. At this rate of loss, Britain would exhaust its reserves of food, fuel, and ammunition before the summer of 1943 ended. Walker knows these numbers intimately. Every pilot at RAF St. Ival in Cornwall knows them. They circulate on typed sheets through the ready room, each month's tally worse than the preceding one. The strategic calculus is inescapable unless something changes dramatically. The Third Reich will starve Britain into surrender without ever launching the cross-channel invasion that the British Army has spent 4 years preparing to repel. The fundamental problem is not locating the U-boats. Improved radar, extended patrol ranges, better coordination with naval convoys, all of these innovations have made it increasingly possible to find German submarines operating on the surface. The problem is killing them. Walker has flown dozens of patrols over the western approaches, that vast stretch of ocean where merchant convoys bunch together for the final run to Liverpool and Glasgow. Submarines. He has manoeuvred into an attack position. He has even dropped depth charges. But by the time his Liberator reaches the attack altitude specified in the tactical manual, typically 4,000 to 5,000 feet, the height that provides good visibility and safe maneuvering room the U-boat's lookouts have seen him. They dive. The grey Atlantic water closes over the conning tower like a curtain, and the submarine disappears into depths where aircraft weapons cannot follow. The tactical doctrine is clear, developed over 2 years of hard experience and written into official guidance. Maintain altitude for visibility and safety. Give yourself time to line up the attack properly. Drop your depth charges from high enough that you will not be caught in the blast radius of your own weapons. Return to base with aircraft and crew intact. But the tactical doctrine, precise and reasonable as it appears on paper, is losing the war. The officers' mess at St. Ival has stopped, feeling like a place where men gather to relax. It has become a room where pilots sit quietly, drinking tea or whiskey depending on the hour, staring at mission reports that detail another convoy mauled, another dozen merchant ships gone down, another few hundred sailors drowned in the icy Atlantic. Walker remembers a night in early April when Flight Lieutenant Carson, who had flown anti-submarine patrols since 1941, simply put his head in his hands and said nothing for 20 minutes. No one disturbed him. They all understood. Carson had spotted 3 U-boats that month. All 3 had dived successfully. All 3 had escaped to hunt again. The submarines themselves have become more dangerous. The Type 7 Sea U-boat that forms the backbone of Dönitz's fleet carries 14 torpedoes and can remain at sea for 12 weeks. Its maximum surface speed of 17 knots makes it nearly impossible for most merchant ships to outrun. Its diving time, the critical interval, between the order to dive and the moment the boat reaches safe depth, has been reduced through relentless training to approximately 35 seconds from a standing start. 35 seconds is not much time, but when an attacking aircraft is first spotted at 4,000 feet altitude and 3 miles distance, 35 seconds is more than adequate. At RAF Coastal Command headquarters in Northwood, Air Marshal Sir John Slessor has been studying attack reports with the focused intensity of a man who understands that he is losing. Slessor is 51 years old in the spring of 1943, a career RAF officer who has spent the previous 3 years grappling with the intractable problem of anti-submarine warfare. He is not given to dramatic gestures or revolutionary thinking. His approach to military problems tends toward the methodical and the incremental. But by late April, incrementalism is no longer sufficient. The reports spread across his desk at Northwood tell a story that conventional tactics cannot address. In the rare instances where Coastal Command aircraft have successfully attacked and sunk U-boats, the attacks share a common characteristic. They happened fast. The pilots who actually killed submarines were the ones who gave the U-boat crew no time to react, which necessarily meant attacking from lower altitude, sometimes much lower altitude, before the lookouts could spot the approaching aircraft and order a crash dive. Slessor spent 3 days in late April reviewing every successful U-boat kill of the previous 6 months. He cross-references attack altitude with outcome. The pattern is undeniable. Attacks from 4,000 feet, 5% success rate. Attacks from 2,000 feet, 11% success rate. Attacks from 500 feet or below, 43% success rate. The statistics are unambiguous. Flying low works. Flying high does not. On May 7, 1943, Slessor issued a directive that would save thousands of lives and shatter the nerves of his own pilots. The order circulates through Coastal Command with unusual speed. All anti-submarine aircraft are to attack from minimum altitude. Approach at wave-top level. Do not gain altitude for the attack run. Maintain low-level flight until weapons release. 50 feet. That number begins appearing in briefing rooms from Cornwall to Iceland, from Gibraltar to Northern Ireland, 50 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The pilots read the new directive and understand immediately what it demands. At 50 feet over the Atlantic, there is functionally no margin for error. A moment of turbulence, an instrument malfunction, a brief lapse in concentration, a sudden wind gust from an unexpected quarter, any of these commonplace events will slam a 4-engine bomber into the ocean at 180 miles per hour. There will be no recovery. There will be no second chance. There will not even be time to realize what is happening. The Atlantic does not forgive mistakes at 50 feet. Lieutenant Ted Moore, a Canadian pilot with 120 Squadron based in Iceland, writes in his diary on the evening of May 7th, "They are asking us to fly at the altitude where you die if you blink. I understand why. I understand the logic. That does not mean I am not terrified." But Moore, like every other pilot who reads the directive, also grasps the tactical reasoning. At 50 feet above the water, you are effectively invisible to lookouts scanning the sky. A U-boat's watch crew, trained to spot aircraft silhouetted against clouds or blue sky, will not see a low-flying bomber against the grey backdrop of the ocean itself. Not until the aircraft is directly upon them. Not until it is far too late to dive. The theoretical advantage is clear. In practice, the advantage must be purchased with constant, grinding fear. The plan itself possesses a terrible simplicity. Find the U-boat using radar or visual sighting. Descend to 50 feet. Maintain that altitude regardless of conditions. Race toward the target at maximum continuous speed for a B-24 Liberator, approximately 190 miles per hour at sea level, close to within 200 yards before the U-boat's crew realizes the danger. Drop depth charges set for shallow detonation 25 feet beneath the surface. Pull up hard and fast, climbing away from the blast radius before your own weapons destroy you. In the briefing room, described in the calm language of tactical doctrine, the procedure sounds almost routine. In execution, over the grey Atlantic, with a 50-foot ceiling and a 40-ton aircraft shaking itself apart from low-altitude turbulence, routine is not remotely the correct word. Walker gets his first opportunity to test the new tactics on May 12, 1943. He has been airborne for 4 hours and 17 minutes, flying a standard anti-submarine patrol pattern 260 miles west of Ireland. The radar operator, Sergeant Collins, is hunched over his scope in the Liberator's nose, watching the greenish cathode ray display for the telltale echo that indicates a surface contact. At 11:43 hours, Collins calls out a contact at 5 miles, bearing 270 degrees. Walker does not climb to investigate. He does not circle for a better angle. He pushes the control yoke forward, and the B-24 drops toward the wavetops like a stone. The altimeter unwinds rapidly 3,000 feet, 2,000, 1,000, 500. The aircraft enters the turbulent air just above the ocean surface, and the airframe begins to buck and shake. Co-pilot Lieutenant Barnes places his hand near the yoke, ready to grab the controls instantly if Walker's attention wavers for even a moment. Through the windscreen, Walker can see nothing but ocean. Grey water, white caps, the occasional spray of foam. The horizon has disappeared. There is no reference point except the instruments and the rushing water beneath them. At this altitude, spatial disorientation is not a theoretical danger discussed in flight school. It is an immediate and constant threat. Without instruments, a pilot would have no idea whether he was flying level or banking into a turn that would end with the wingtip catching a wave. 1,200 yards ahead, through the spray and murk, Walker spots it. A dark shape, low in the water, moving slowly southward. The U-boat is on the surface, both diesel engines running, charging the massive battery banks that provide submerged propulsion. The submarine is vulnerable, but not defenseless. Walker can see the 20mm anti-aircraft gun mounted forward of the conning tower, and he knows that boats of this type often carry additional weapons, machine guns, a 37mm cannon, sometimes heavier armament. Walker does not climb. The entire tactical advantage depends on staying low, staying invisible against the ocean background, staying below the natural sightline of lookouts trained to scan the sky. He pushes the throttles forward, and the B-24's 4 Pratt & Whitney radial engines roar up to maximum continuous power. The bomber accelerates, shaking harder as airspeed increases. 800 yards. The men on the U-boat's conning tower must be exhausted or complacent or simply unlucky. They are not looking down at the water, where nothing should be coming from. They are scanning the sky and the horizon, watching for danger from the places where danger has always come from in the past. 600 yards. Walker can make out details now. The conning tower is painted in standard grey camouflage. The deck gun is unmanned. 3 men are visible topside lookouts, probably, though at this distance Walker cannot distinguish their features or their ranks. The submarine's bow cuts through the gentle swell, leaving a white wake. 400 yards. One of the lookouts sees the Liberator. Head snap around, watches him point, watches his mouth open in what must be a shout of alarm. The other lookouts turn. One of them starts running toward the conning tower hatch, 200 yards. The U-boat's bow dips sharply as ballast tanks begin to flood. The submarine is attempting a crash dive, following the procedure that has saved countless U-boats from high-altitude attack. Under normal circumstances, an aircraft attacking from 4,000 feet, the boat would have perhaps 40 seconds from first sighting to weapons release. 40 seconds is more than enough time to submerge to safe depth. But these are not normal circumstances. Walker has given them 15 seconds. Bombs away, the bombardier, Sergeant Patterson, calls out over the intercom. 4 depth charges tumble from the B-24's bomb bay. Each charge weighs 250 pounds and contains a Torpex explosive charge powerful enough to rupture a submarine's pressure hull at close range. They fall for exactly 1 second before hitting the water. Walker hauls back on the control yoke with every ounce of strength in his arms. The Liberator's nose comes up violently. The wings bite into the air. The aircraft climbs, the G-forces pressing Walker deep into his seat, his vision narrowing at the edges as blood drains from his head. Barnes has both hands on the co-pilot's yoke, pulling, helping to hold the aircraft in its desperate climb away from the ocean surface. Behind and below them, the Atlantic erupts. The 4 depth charges detonate almost simultaneously, 25 feet beneath the surface. 4 massive columns of white water leap upward, each geyser reaching 60 feet into the air. The shock wave from the explosions radiates outward through the water at 4,000 feet per second, a pressure pulse that can crush steel. The blast wave hits the Liberator's tail assembly, and the aircraft lurches sideways as if struck by a giant hand. Walker fights the controls, forcing the wings level, maintaining the climb. At 200 feet altitude, an altitude that minutes ago would have seemed dangerously low and now feels luxurious, safe, almost mountainous, he allows himself to level off and breathe. They circle back at 500 feet. Walker banks the Liberator gently, bringing them around to survey the attack site. Where the U-boat was, there is now an oil slick spreading across the grey water in an expanding circle. Debris bobs in the swell wooden planking, pieces of equipment, a cork life jacket. 6 men are visible, clinging to wreckage, small dots of orange against the dark water. Walker radios their position to HMS Hesperus, a destroyer operating 40 miles to the south. Then he marks the entry in his log. U-456, sunk, crew, 44 men. Survivors, 6 men visible. He does not feel victorious. He feels like a man who has just survived a high-speed automobile crash through no particular virtue of his own only luck and perhaps reflexes. His hands are shaking slightly. Barnes is pale. In the rear of the aircraft, the gunners are silent. They fly back to St. Ival at a comfortable 3,000 feet. No one speaks much over the intercom. When they land, Walker's legs are unsteady as he climbs down from the cockpit. He has been flying combat missions for 18 months. He has faced German fighters over France. He has flown through anti-aircraft fire over occupied ports. Nothing has frightened him the way that 50-foot approach frightened him, the ocean rushing beneath the aircraft, the absolute certainty that one mistake meant death, the knowledge that he would have to do this again and again for as long as the war continued. That night in the officers' mess, Flight Lieutenant Carson, the same Carson who had sat with his head in his hands weeks earlier, approaches Walker's table. Carson has heard about the kill. Everyone has heard. News of successful attacks travels quickly. They're going to ask us to do this every time. Now, Carson says quietly. Walker nods. He already knows this. The directive is clear. All attacks at minimum altitude, every patrol, every contact. 50 feet above the Atlantic, where you cannot afford to blink. Are you going to refuse? Carson asks. Walker considers the question seriously. RAF regulations allow a pilot to decline missions under certain circumstances, though doing so carries significant professional and social consequences. He could say that the risk is too great, that the tactic is unsound, that asking men to fly at 50 feet for hours at a time is impossible. No, Walker says finally. We're losing. If this works, if flying low actually lets us kill these boats, then we fly low. Carson is quiet for a moment. Then he says, I watched the convoy reports from March. We lost 108 ships. If we had stopped even half of those U-boats— He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. The pattern begins to repeat itself across the entire Atlantic theatre with startling speed. On May 14th, a Sunderland flying boat from 10 Squadron, operating out of Pembroke Dock in Wales, catches U-657 on the surface 300 miles west of Brittany. Pilot Officer Jenkins brings the enormous 4-engine flying boat down to 70 feet as low as the Sunderland's design safely permits and releases 6 depth charges, while the U-boat's gun crew scrambles to man their 20mm cannon. The charges straddle the submarine perfectly. U-657 goes down with all hands, 43 men. May 15th, U-176, intercepted by a B-24 from No. 4 Squadron while transiting the Bay of Biscay. The Liberator attacks from 60 feet. The U-boat's commander, Captain Lieutenant Rainer Dirksen, has just enough time to order a crash dive before the depth charges hit. The submarine reaches 30 feet before the explosions tear through her pressure hull. 52 men die. There are no survivors. May 17th. U-646, destroyed by a Wellington bomber from 172 Squadron. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Davis, flies so low on the attack run that his tail wheel actually touches the crest of a wave. He does not realize this until after landing, when the ground crew points out the saltwater corrosion on the tail assembly. Davis stares at the damage for several minutes without speaking, apparently unable to process how close he came to death. U-646's entire crew of 47 men is lost. The German Naval Command notices the shift immediately. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet and one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted military advisors, reads the loss reports with mounting alarm that by mid-May has transformed into something approaching panic. His submarines are dying. Not slowly, not in the grinding attrition that he had anticipated and planned for, but suddenly and catastrophically. The May losses are unprecedented in the entire history of submarine warfare. In 2 weeks, he has lost more operational U-boats than in the previous 3 months combined. The reports coming back from surviving boats tell a consistent and deeply troubling story. The Allied aircraft, his captains report, are appearing from nowhere. One moment, the ocean is empty in all directions, the lookouts scanning a clear horizon. The next moment, a 4-engine bomber is directly on top of them, too close to evade, too close to dive away from, close enough that crew members can see the individual rivets on the aircraft's fuselage. The boats are being caught completely by surprise, their lookouts failing to spot the attackers until it is far too late to take defensive action. On May 19th, Dönitz issued new operational orders to all boats at sea. U-boats must dive immediately upon sighting aircraft, regardless of the aircraft's altitude or apparent distance. They are to remain submerged during all daylight hours when operating in areas of known Allied air patrol. Surface running is permitted, only at night, and only when absolutely necessary to charge batteries or make high-speed transits. The directive represents a fundamental shift in U-boat doctrine. For the first 2 years of the war, submarines had operated with relative impunity on the surface, diving only when actually under attack. Surface running allowed faster speed, better visibility, and the ability to use diesel engines rather than depleting limited battery reserves. Now Dönitz is ordering his boats to hide beneath the waves like prey animals, surrendering most of their operational advantages in a desperate attempt to avoid the aircraft that are hunting them. But even this radical change in tactics does not save them. On the night of May 24th, 1943, U-468 surfaced after dark approximately 400 miles west of Ireland. The boat's commander, Captain Lieutenant Clemens Chamong, is an experienced officer with 2 years of Atlantic operations behind him. He knows the risks of surface running, but his batteries are nearly depleted, and he has no choice. The boat must charge or risk being trapped on the bottom, unable to maneuver, an easy target for any destroyer that happens to pass overhead with active sonar. Chamong believes he is relatively safe. Allied aircraft do not conduct effective night patrols. The early radar systems are too crude, too unreliable, and the darkness makes visual sighting essentially impossible. He has surfaced at night dozens of times before without incident. His lookouts scan the darkness, seeing nothing but stars and the gentle swell of the Atlantic. What Chamong does not know, what German naval intelligence has not yet fully grasped, is that the Allies have deployed a new generation of airborne radar. The centimetric radar sets, small enough to fit in a bomber's nose compartment, powerful enough to paint a detailed picture of the ocean surface, have begun appearing on coastal command aircraft in late April. The technology represents a quantum leap over earlier systems. Where older radar might detect a submarine at 2 or 3 miles in ideal conditions, the new sets can spot a surfaced U-boat from 12 miles away, in complete darkness, through clouds or fog. Walker's B-24 is equipped with one of these new radar sets. At 11:47 in the evening on May 24th, his radar operator picks up U-468 from 11 miles distant. The contact appears on the scope as a clear, unmistakable echo. Walker does not hesitate. He pushes the yoke forward, and the Liberator descends toward the invisible ocean below. Descending to 50 feet in complete darkness is an act that requires absolute faith in instruments and training. Walker cannot see the water. He cannot see the horizon. He cannot see anything outside the cockpit except impenetrable blackness. He is flying entirely on the altimeter and the artificial horizon indicator, trusting that the instruments are accurate, trusting that the numbers glowing faintly on the dial faces are correct, trusting that he is not actually banking or climbing or descending when the instruments say he is flying straight and level. One mistake in reading the instruments, one moment of vertigo, one instrument malfunction, and the B-24 will fly directly into the Atlantic at 180 miles per hour. There will be no warning. The ocean will not be visible until the instant before impact. The crew will have no time to react, no possibility of survival. They will simply cease to exist. But Walker maintains the descent, watching the altimeter unwind 500 feet, 300, 100, 75, 50. He levels off at exactly 50 feet, though exactly is perhaps misleading. In darkness, with only instruments for reference, he is maintaining altitude to within perhaps 10 or 15 feet, which represents extraordinarily precise flying, but also means that he is occasionally dropping to 40 feet or climbing to 65 feet as he makes constant tiny corrections to the controls. His navigator, Lieutenant Morrison, provides continuous updates based on the radar plot. 2 miles, 1.5 miles, 1 mile, half a mile. At a quarter mile, 440 yards, Walker switches on the Leigh Light. This is a powerful searchlight mounted beneath the bomber's wing, capable of producing 20 million candle power of illumination. The effect is instantaneous and overwhelming. The ocean, invisible a moment before, explodes into visibility. A circle of harsh white light appears on the black water, bright as noon, illuminating an area 200 yards in diameter. And there, perfectly centered in the light, caught like an animal in headlights, U-468. The submarine is fully surfaced, both diesel engines running. Men are visible on the conning tower. They are turning toward the light, raising their hands to shield their eyes from the sudden glare, their faces showing expressions that Walker will remember for the rest of his life: shock, confusion, terror, the absolute certainty that they are about to die. The depth charges fall, while Chamong's crew is still reacting to the light. 4 charges, released in a perfect stick, entering the water 50 feet apart. Walker pulls up hard, the Leigh Light switching off as the Liberator climbs, and behind them the ocean erupts in 4 massive explosions. U-468 is caught directly in the blast zone. The pressure hull ruptures in multiple locations. The boat does not sink slowly, it breaks apart and goes down in less than 20 seconds. Of the 49 men aboard, only one survives the initial explosions. He will float in the darkness for 6 hours before being picked up by a passing convoy, the only man of his crew to live through that night. Walker circles once at 500 feet, but there is nothing to see. The oil slick is invisible in the darkness. He marks the position and time in his log, then turns for home. The return flight to St. Eval takes 2.5 hours. No one in the crew speaks much. What they have just done, descending to 50 feet in complete darkness, flying blind on instruments alone, attacking a target they could not see until the searchlight revealed it represents a level of operational risk that pushes far beyond anything in their training or previous experience. When they land, the intelligence officer wants a detailed debriefing. Walker provides the facts: time, location, approach, altitude, number of depth charges released, observed results. He does not mention that his hands are still shaking slightly. He does not mention that the image of those men on the conning tower, their faces caught in the Leigh Light for one frozen instant, will appear in his dreams for months afterward. By the end of May 1943, the numbers tell a story that seems almost impossible. 41 U-boats sunk in a single month. 6 additional boats damaged so severely that they are forced to return to port and are written off as total losses, their hulls too broken to repair. German submarine operations in the North Atlantic have been effectively suspended. Dönitz has ordered most of his remaining boats to withdraw to safer waters or return to base. Allied shipping losses have dropped by 70% compared to March. The convoys are getting through. The merchant ships are arriving in Liverpool and Glasgow with their holds full of food, ammunition, fuel, and supplies. The strategic mathematics have reversed almost overnight. Britain is no longer facing starvation. The Atlantic supply line, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, has stabilized. The tactical innovation of low-altitude attack has proven devastatingly effective, but the cost is measured in ways that do not appear in official reports. The Allies lost 58 aircraft during May. Most of these losses are not attributable to German defensive fire. They are operational losses. Aircraft that crashed into the ocean during low-altitude flight, planes that suffered mechanical failures at altitudes where no recovery was possible, bombers that flew into the water because a pilot was exhausted or disoriented or simply made one small mistake at the worst possible moment. At St. Eval, Walker sits in the officers' mess on the evening of May 31st. He has flown 37 anti-submarine patrols in the last 6 weeks. He has sunk 3 U-boats. He has watched 2 aircraft from his squadron crash into the ocean, one from mechanical failure at low altitude, one from what the official report will call pilot error. But what everyone who knew the pilot understands was simple exhaustion. 12 men died, their bodies never recovered from the Atlantic. Walker does not sleep well anymore. When he closes his eyes, he sees the ocean rushing toward him at 50 feet. He feels the constant tension of low-altitude flight, the knowledge that he is flying at the exact altitude where one small mistake means instant death. He dreams about instrument failures, about moments of disorientation, about the B-24's nose dipping just slightly too far and the propellers hitting the water. But the convoys are getting through. The merchant ships are arriving. Britain is not starving. And in the larger strategic context, that makes the cost, the fear, the exhaustion, the constant proximity to death somehow bearable. Flight Lieutenant Davis, the pilot whose tail wheel touched the water during an attack run, is grounded in early July. His squadron commander makes the decision after Davis freezes at the controls during a training flight, unable to descend below 500 feet. The medical report, written by the RAF's flight surgeon, notes operational exhaustion and acute stress reaction consistent with extended low-altitude operations. Davis has flown 63 anti-submarine patrols in 3 months. He will spend 6 weeks in hospital, after which he is quietly transferred to a Couloir, training command position in Canada. He never flies combat operations again. Lieutenant Ted Moore, the Canadian pilot who wrote in his diary about dying if you blink, completes his operational tour in August and immediately requests a transfer to any duty that does not involve anti-submarine work. His request is granted. He spends the remainder of the war as a transport pilot, ferrying supplies and personnel across the Atlantic at comfortable altitudes above 10,000 feet. In 1987, in an interview for a Canadian war documentary, Moore will say, "I still dream about it sometimes, flying at 50 feet, the ocean right there beneath you. I wake up and I can still feel it, the fear. It never really goes away." If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Germans draw their own conclusions from the catastrophe of May 1943. Dönitz, formerly, withdrew the majority of his submarine force from the North Atlantic in early June. He cannot sustain the losses. The basic mathematics of attrition have turned decisively against him. In March, his U-boats sank 108 merchant ships while losing 15 submarines, a favourable exchange ratio from the German perspective. In May, his boats sank 58 merchant ships while losing 41 submarines. The exchange ratio has inverted completely. He is losing U-boats faster than the German shipyards can build replacements. The submarines do not disappear entirely. They continue to operate, attacking convoys when opportunities present themselves, maintaining a presence in the Atlantic. But the sustained campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, the strategic effort to starve Britain into submission through the systematic destruction of merchant shipping, has been broken. The U-boats will sink ships throughout the rest of the war, but never again with the terrible effectiveness they achieved in early 1943. In his post-war interrogation by Allied intelligence officers, conducted in June 1945 at a detention facility in southern England, Dönitz is asked directly what caused the collapse of the U-boat campaign. He is 63 years old at this point, grey-haired and bitter. His military career ended in absolute defeat. He considers the question for a long moment before answering. "The aircraft," he says finally. "Your aircraft learned to hunt us the way we hunted the convoys, without mercy, without hesitation, accepting terrible risks to achieve the kill. In April, we could dive away from your planes. In May, we could not. They appeared from nowhere. Too close to escape. That was the difference." The interrogating officer asks about specific technological factors: improved radar, longer-range aircraft, better depth charges. Dönitz acknowledges these developments but dismisses them as secondary considerations. "Technology mattered," he says. "But what destroyed my boats was not technology. It was your willingness to fly at altitudes where your own pilots died from simple mistakes as often as they died from our guns. That level of desperation, that acceptance of risk, we did not anticipate it." The interrogation transcript, declassified in 1992, preserves this exchange. It represents one of the few moments in the extensive post-war debriefings where Dönitz speaks with what seems to be genuine respect for his opponents, rather than the bitter defensiveness that characterizes most of his testimony. The irony runs even deeper than the tactical considerations suggest. The Allies spent billions of dollars developing the technological solutions to the U-boat threat: longer-range patrol aircraft, improved radar systems, more powerful depth charges, better coordinating systems between air and naval forces. All of these developments mattered. All of them contributed to the eventual victory in the Atlantic. But the single most decisive factor, the tactical innovation that actually broke the back of the U-boat campaign, was not a technological breakthrough at all. It was a decision that cost nothing in monetary terms. Fly lower. Fly at the altitude where the ocean can kill you as easily as any German weapon. Accept that risk, internalize that fear, and you become invisible to enemy lookouts until you are too close for them to escape. The tactical advantage is purchased not with money or industrial capacity, but with the psychological resilience of men willing to fly where one mistake means instant death. The depth charge technology helped. The radar improvements helped. The extended range of the B-24 Liberator, allowing patrols to cover areas of the Atlantic that had previously been beyond aircraft reach, helped significantly. But in May 1943, none of these technological advantages mattered as much as the simple tactical decision to approach at 5 pieds of tow, 50 feet rather than 5,000. The human cost of this tactical innovation does not appear in the official histories written immediately after the war. Those early accounts focus on technology, on the production miracles of American industry, on the sophisticated radar systems and long-range aircraft that made victory possible. The psychological price paid by the aircrews who flew at wave-top altitude day after day, patrol after patrol, is mentioned only obliquely, if at all. It is not until decades later, when the veterans themselves begin speaking openly about their experiences, that the full psychological cost becomes clear. These men, Walker, Moore, Davis, and thousands like them, flew in constant fear. Not the acute fear of combat, which comes in intense bursts and then recedes, but the chronic, grinding fear of low-altitude flight over the ocean, where death lurked in every moment of inattention. Every instrument malfunction, every unexpected gust of wind, Walker survives the war. He flew 117 anti-submarine patrols between May 1943 and the German surrender in May 1945. He sank 7 U-boats, 7 confirmed kills, with another 2 listed as probably sunk based on evidence of oil slicks and debris, but without survivor testimony to confirm the loss. He earned the Distinguished Service Order, one of Britain's highest military decorations, for his actions in May and June of 1943. The citation specifically mentions his extraordinary courage and skill in conducting attacks at minimum altitude against enemy submarines. In November 1945, 6 months after the war in Europe ended, Walker resigned his commission and returned to civilian life. He takes a position with British Overseas Airways Corporation, flying commercial routes between London and various European cities. The altitude for these flights is typically 10,000 to 15,000 feet, luxurious, safe, utterly routine altitudes where mistakes are survivable, and the earth below is a distant abstraction rather than an immediate threat. He never flies at 50 feet again. He never wants to. The transition to civilian life is not smooth. Walker has spent 4 years in combat operations, 3 of those years flying anti-submarine patrols. Most of those patrols conducted at altitudes where constant vigilance was the only thing standing between survival and death. The psychological habits ingrained by that experience do not disappear simply because the war has ended. His wife, Margaret, whom he married in 1941 during a brief leave, will later describe the first year after his return as extraordinarily difficult. Walker sleeps poorly. He startles at unexpected sounds. He becomes anxious whenever weather conditions deteriorate, even though the commercial aircraft he flies are far more stable and forgiving than the B-24 Liberators of his combat days. On several occasions, Margaret finds him awake in the middle of the night, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. He does not talk about the war much. This is common among veterans of his generation. The men who fought in the Second World War tend toward reticence about their experiences, unwilling or unable to articulate the things they saw and did. But Walker's silence seems rooted in something beyond mere cultural reticence. It seems more like an active suppression, a deliberate effort to not remember certain specific details. In 1952, 7 years after the war's end, Walker left civilian aviation entirely. He takes a position as a mathematics instructor at a secondary school in Sussex, teaching algebra and geometry to teenagers who have no memory of the war and no particular interest in it. The career change surprises his colleagues at BOAC, who consider Walker an excellent pilot with a promising future in commercial aviation. But Walker finds that he no longer enjoys flying, even at safe altitudes in peaceful skies. The association between flying and fear has become too deeply embedded. He taught mathematics for 23 years, retiring in 1975 at the age of 60. He is, by all accounts, a good teacher, patient, methodical, capable of explaining difficult concepts in ways that students can understand. He never mentions his wartime service in class, Most of his students have no idea that their mathematics teacher once flew anti-submarine patrols at 50 feet, hunting German U-boats across the Atlantic. It is not until 1982, 39 years after the events of May 1943, that Walker speaks publicly about his experiences. The occasion is an interview for a BBC documentary about the Battle of the Atlantic. The documentary filmmakers have contacted him through the RAF Historical Branch, which maintains records of decorated pilots. Walker initially declines the interview request, but the producer is persistent, and eventually Walker agrees to speak on camera. The interview takes place in Walker's home in Sussex. He is 67 years old, grey-haired, soft-spoken. The interviewer asks about the tactical decision to fly at minimum altitude, how the pilots felt about the directive, whether they understood its importance, what it was like to actually conduct attacks from 50 feet. Walker is quiet for a long moment. He looks out the window of his sitting room, where the Sussex countryside rolls away in gentle green hills. Then he speaks. "We were terrified. Every single flight. Every one of us. You cannot fly that low over the Atlantic without fear. The ocean is right there, right beneath you. You can see individual waves. You can see foam on the wave tops. One wrong move and you are dead. Not injured, not in danger, dead. Instantly. You know this consciously every second you are at that altitude. It never becomes routine. It never stops being frightening." The interviewer asks why they continued if the fear was so overwhelming. "Because we were more terrified of losing," Walker says, "of Britain starving, of the convoys being destroyed, of the U-boats winning. The tactical situation in March and April of 1943 was catastrophic. We were losing the Atlantic War. The numbers were clear. So when they told us to fly at 50 feet, we flew at 50 feet, not because we wanted to, not because it was comfortable or safe, because it was the only thing that worked." He pauses, then adds, "I had nightmares about it for 20 years after the war ended. I still have them occasionally. I will be flying at 50 feet, and I know something is about to go wrong, and I cannot prevent it. I wake up before impact. But the fear from those dreams is the same fear I felt on every patrol. It never really goes away." This portion of the interview, approximately 3 minutes of footage, becomes one of the most powerful segments in the documentary. Walker's quiet, matter-of-fact description of sustained fear, delivered without drama or embellishment, conveys the psychological reality of low-altitude anti-submarine operations more effectively than any amount of archival footage or historical narration could achieve. The documentary aired in October 1982 and received significant attention. Walker receives dozens of letters from other veterans, pilots, radar operators, gunners, navigators who flew anti-submarine patrols during the war. Many of them express gratitude that someone has finally articulated the fear that they all shared but rarely discussed. Several letters mention nightmares that have persisted for decades. One former pilot writes, "I have not flown in any aircraft, not even as a passenger, since 1946. I cannot do it. The moment the plane leaves the ground, I am back 50 feet over the Atlantic, and I know we are about to crash." The historical significance of the low-altitude tactical innovation becomes clearer as more archives are declassified and more detailed studies are conducted. In 1991, a comprehensive statistical analysis of Allied anti-submarine operations was published by the Naval Institute Press. The analysis, conducted by military historians with access to both Allied and German records, concludes that the shift to minimum altitude attacks in May 1943 was the single most effective tactical change in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. The numbers are unambiguous. In the 4 months before the May Directive, January through April 1943 Coastal Command aircraft attacked 137 U-boats and sank 19, a success rate of 13.9%. In the 4 months after the directive, May through August, they attacked 203 U-boats and sank 86, a success rate of 42.4%. The success rate more than tripled, using essentially the same aircraft, the same weapons, and the same crews. The only significant variable was attack altitude. The German records tell the same story from the opposite perspective. U-boat patrol reports from April 1943 routinely mention aircraft sightings, with most entries noting that the boat successfully dived and evaded attack. By June, the patrol reports that survived, and many boats simply disappeared without sending any final report, describe attacks that came without warning or before lookouts could react. The tactical surprise achieved by a low-altitude approach was nearly total. The irony extends beyond mere tactics into the realm of strategic planning and resource allocation. The British and American governments spent enormous resources developing technological solutions to the U-boat threat. The development of centimetric radar alone cost millions of pounds. The production of long-range patrol aircraft required the conversion of entire factory complexes. Training of aircrews absorbed resources that could have been used elsewhere. All of these expenditures were necessary and valuable, but the breakthrough that actually turned the tide, the tactical innovation that made all the technology effective, required no new equipment, no additional training, no industrial investment. It required only a willingness to accept risk, to fly at altitudes where survival depended on constant vigilance and good fortune, to operate in conditions that were psychologically unsustainable over long periods, but which, in the short term, proved devastatingly effective. Military strategists studying the Battle of the Atlantic in subsequent decades have noted this paradox repeatedly. The lesson seems to be that technological superiority, while important, is not decisive unless paired with tactical innovation and the willingness to accept costs, including psychological costs that may seem unreasonable or unsustainable. The Allied victory in the Atlantic was built on technology, yes, but it was purchased with the nerves of men who flew at 50 feet. Walker died in March 1997, at the age of 82. His obituary in the Times mentions his wartime service and his Distinguished Service Order, but devotes most of its length to his career as a mathematics teacher, a profession he practiced 3 times longer than he flew combat missions. Several of his former students attend the funeral, men and women in their 50s and 60s, who remember him as a patient teacher with a quiet demeanor. Only a handful of the mourners, mostly elderly men, his fellow pilots from Coastal Command, understand the full measure of what Walker accomplished between May 1943 and May 1945. They are the ones who flew at 50 feet. They are the ones who know what that cost. In Walker's papers, discovered by his daughter while settling his estate, there is a diary entry from June 1943. The entry is brief, written in Walker's precise handwriting. Flew patrol today. Spotted U-boat at 1,347 hours. Attacked from 50 feet. Sank confirmed. 41 men lost. Survivors unknown. We have been doing this for 5 weeks now. I do not know how much longer we can sustain this level of operations. The fear does not diminish with repetition, it accumulates. Every flight is harder than the last. But the convoys are getting through. That must be enough. The tactical innovation of May 1943, the decision to fly at minimum altitude, saved the Battle of the Atlantic. This is a historical fact, supported by comprehensive analysis of operational records from both sides. But the human cost of that innovation, the psychological price paid by the men who implemented it, does not appear in most historical accounts. It appears instead in diary entries like Walker's, in interviews conducted decades after the fact, in letters between veterans who shared experiences they could not discuss with anyone else. The Battle of the Atlantic was decided by many factors: industrial production, technological innovation, intelligence capabilities, strategic coordination between Allied forces. But in the crucial month of May 1943, when the outcome still hung in balance, the decisive factor was simpler and more human. It was men who chose to fly at an altitude where fear was constant, where death was always one small mistake away, and where the only advantage was surprise purchased with their own psychological suffering. 40 U-boats in 3 weeks. The mathematics that saved a nation, written in salt water and sustained terror. 50 feet. The altitude where heroes learned that victory sometimes requires flying so low that you can see your own reflection in the water rushing beneath you, and choosing to stay there anyway, flight after flight, patrol after patrol, until the war is won or you are dead. The memorial at RAF Saint-Ival, erected in 1985, lists the names of Coastal Command aircrew killed in action during the Second World War. There are hundreds of names, arranged alphabetically, carved into granite. Some of these men died in combat with German fighters. Some were shot down by anti-aircraft fire. But many, perhaps most, died in operational accidents, aircraft that flew into the ocean during low-altitude patrols, crews that disappeared without trace over the Atlantic. The memorial does not distinguish between combat losses and operational losses. All are listed together, all equally honoured. This is perhaps appropriate. In the context of the Battle of the Atlantic, the distinction between dying from enemy action and dying from the inherent dangers of low-altitude flight is largely meaningless. Both types of death were consequences of the same tactical decision, the same acceptance of risk. Walker's name does not appear on the memorial. He survived. But in some sense, the memorial represents him as much as it represents the men who died. They all flew at 50 feet. They all accepted the risk. Some died. Some survived. All of them helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, and all of them paid a psychological price that most never fully articulated. The lesson, if there is one, is not particularly comfortable. It is that desperate circumstances sometimes require desperate measures. That technological superiority is necessary, but not sufficient. That victory in war is often purchased not with superior equipment or better strategy, but with the willingness of ordinary men to do things that terrify them, repeatedly, until either the war is won or they break. The pilots who flew at 50 feet over the Atlantic in the spring and summer of 1943 were not superhuman. They were terrified. They had nightmares. Some of them broke down under the psychological strain. But they flew the missions anyway, because the alternative, losing the Battle of the Atlantic, allowing Britain to be starved into submission, was unacceptable. That is the real story of the low-altitude tactical innovation. Not a story of technological triumph or strategic brilliance, but a story of men who chose to be afraid every day, who accepted fear as the price of operational effectiveness, and who continued flying at 50 feet until the U-boats stopped coming. The ocean at 50 feet is grey and immediate and utterly unforgiving. It rushes beneath the aircraft at 180 miles per hour. One mistake, and you are dead. The men who flew there knew this. They flew there anyway. That is how the Battle of the Atlantic was won. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.